Hi, my name's Arthur, and this video is about hope. I think of hope as a tool that allows us to make the change towards things that we want in life. I'm not a particularly spiritual person, but for me, allowing myself to visualize a future where it all works out, where I get all the things I want, where I deserve happiness, it feels almost sacred. The trans experience can be super hard, and I think that we as a community sometimes lean into that pain and that frustration. Like, there's this idea that it's only bad things that warrant respect, right? So we talk about the pain around our bodies, around political situation, around our relationships with others, because we want people to respect us, we want people to listen to us. And it's that negative emotion that really drives empathy in people. And I think there's this narrative that hope can be naive, or that hope is the same as inaction. But I think of hope as like exactly the opposite. I think of hope as a call towards action. Hope is what allows us to take the steps towards that future that we see for ourselves. If you clicked on this video, you feel called towards hope on something. Maybe it's about transition, but maybe it's something entirely different. I'm inviting you to imagine that world where it all works out. So, again, this can be just much broader than transition. Imagine yourself in a couple of years where all of the things that you're worried about, all of the things that you want for yourself, but you're not sure that it makes sense, that everything just goes okay. What does it feel like if you land where you need to land? And you can, I don't know, close your eyes and imagine it, right? Imagine yourself in a couple of years waking up in the morning, making your breakfast, and knowing that it turned out okay. That all those things that you were stressed about, they were okay. And maybe you're not exactly where you thought you'd be, but that feeling that you thought you needed, that emotion that was calling you, you got that. You got what you needed. I think about for myself, so I'm wrapping up grad school right now, and I imagine myself in a couple of years living as a professor in a big city. I imagine myself forming meaningful relationships with my colleagues and with my students. I imagine myself living with my partner in a cute, messy apartment, and we host all sorts of dinner parties and little gatherings with friends. And we've made new friends in the city, but we stay close with our old friends. And I imagine myself continuing to grow into my transness and feeling more comfortable with that part of myself, and, you know, loving the fact that I'm a person with a special and surprising history. And I don't know that every single one of those details is going to work out for me, right? But I have faith that this feeling that I'm called towards, this joy and community and warmth and adventure and newness, that all of that I'm called towards is going to happen for me. Honestly, again, it's like I'm in a stressful time of my life. I'm trying to write my dissertation, and so I have to wake up each morning and I have to get the motivation to do all that. And so I like to take some time as I'm like, you know, eating my breakfast and putting on my clothes to imagine myself as a professor and imagine how good it's going to feel when all those things I've been working towards, when they like work out. And so, you know, I invite you to like pause the video, close your eyes, and think about it, like really think about it. And I think also it's just fun to also think through like step by step, not just like what it would be like for your dream to come true, but then what does the rest of it look like? What does like normalcy look like when your dream comes true? What does it look like to do your laundry knowing that it worked out? What does it look like to call your mom knowing that it worked out? What does it look like to go on a run knowing that it worked out? And I think that's something that really excites me. And that's something that I've lived right now. I think I think almost all of my dreams that I had for myself a handful of years came true. And I think one of the best parts is how fulfilling normal life looks like when I've landed. And so I like to continue to imagine that, and it really motivates me. So I asked you guys what you were looking for hope on with your transition, and I was just really floored by the responses I got. There were so many of them. I saw myself in so many of them. They were beautifully written, and what people are dealing with is often so hard, and I remember that pain. It's really special to me to be able to film this video because I felt like when I was at different stages of my transition, there were times when I didn't have hope and I didn't know what it would look like for it to turn out okay. And so it's really wonderful to me to be able to hopefully, you know, offer you guys that optimism. So there were so many of them that I'm going to make this a weekly series. Well, hopefully weekly, but certainly there's going to be many more videos like this. I picked just 3 specific, you know, questions that people submitted that I'm going to respond to, but I've kept the form open, so feel free to send in more if this video inspires you. But I imagine that for many of you, the themes I want to talk about came up again and again and again, so there's going to be something here for a lot of you. So I'm going to start by reading off one specific submission that was about career worries, and again, that came up a ton. So this person writes, I hope that my plans to transition won't shatter or limit my career aspirations. My dreams for what I want to eventually become are large, and I fear every day that being transgender will limit them, both through the mental process of transitioning and mostly through the negative perceptions others may have of me as a trans person. So this was something that I worried about so much leading up to my transition. Many of you know that I am some of you might know, I am a PhD student in economics, and I'm planning on becoming an economist, becoming a professor, and my drive to do academic economics research is like really one of the core joys in my life. And it's something I've known I wanted to for a really long time. I certainly knew that before I knew I was trans. And I spent a lot of time and energy and passion building up my portfolio as someone that was going to apply to economics grad school when I, was realizing I was transgender. And I really worried that maybe I was throwing away something when I decided to transition. I remember talking with friends, talking with advisors, talking with my parents, and I kept on saying, like, what's gonna happen? And I talked with gay economists that I found through the broad extended network, and no one could tell me how it was going to turn out because no one knew of a trans economist. There's literally one who transitioned, one of prominence who transitioned after she already had tenure and was a trans woman, and she transitioned decades ago. So that was like not a very useful comparison for me, and no one could point me towards anyone like me. No one could at all. And so I just remember sitting there and thinking, like, oh my god, it's never been done before. Is this impossible? Is it not going to work? Is the field going to, is it too conservative? Is it too strange that I'm doing this? Are people going to judge me? What are all of the beautiful and lovely relationships with economists that I built up going to turn into? What if they don't believe the trans thing? Will they still want to advise me? Will they still care about my research? What I would tell myself then, and what I would tell this person who submitted the question, is just because it hasn't been done yet doesn't mean it's impossible. It might just mean that no one's tried. So, as it turns out, I've had a really great time being a transgender economist, and I couldn't find an example of someone like me, and I couldn't guarantee that it was possible. But I honestly think that, it's like, being a trans man is a pretty rare experience, as it is. And then the choice of, doing a PhD and all the school that entails, that's also a pretty rare experience, and I think there just hadn't been one of each, And I think it was so scary, but as it turns out, basically what happened was all of the relationships that I had built up, they all stayed. I still am in touch, or as good as in touch as I my transition is not impeding me being in touch with my former advisors. It's just the extent to which I have energy to send emails. But I still have perfectly good relationships with everyone who knew me before. No one says weird things around the fact that I'm trans. It just does not come up. A few of them one of them made a very economist-y joke about this. So economists care a lot about studying discrimination, as it turns out, and a lot of that will be about gender. So for example, the gender wage gap or experiences of men and women in the labor force. And he made some joke where he was like, you have the ideal natural experiment, where natural experiment is another piece of economics jargon. And so he was asking me about what was my experience like becoming a man as someone who had been a woman, and did it offer me any insights into the discrimination that women face within our field. And he was saying that all in a very economisty framework. I had a couple conversations with people just saying why did I pick my name, talking about my plans for transition, but at the end of the day, economists want to talk about economics. We don't really talk about the fact that I'm transgender much at all. And then I entered I entered my PhD, I entered a whole new school, and some of the professors there, I think, could have put together that I transitioned because they saw my name, when they were admitting me, and then saw my name after I arrived, and some of them met me right before. And so there were a few professors where I did have to email. I had to say, hey, you met me as blah, but now I'm going by Arthur. And I remember that was very scary, and they were like, we're happy that you chose the school, Arthur. And I remember receiving that email when I officially accepted my offer, where that professor was like, welcome to school, Arthur. It was just it was so sweet. I was like, wow, okay, it's gonna be okay. And then, I think it all felt so salient at the start of my transition because my transition was happening. It was so active. And then it just faded into the background. And I don't think anyone really knows I'm trans these days. I mean, that's not true, but a very large fraction, the vast majority of people that I interact with professionally do not know I'm trans. And some small minority do, and they just never bring it up because it's not really appropriate to. And I wouldn't have expected that it would be that simple, I spent so long worrying. And I spent so long thinking that it wasn't going to turn out, and it was just because no one had done it before. It wasn't because it actually was too hard to do it. There's going to be a book that's written about the experiences of LGBT economists. It's mostly focused on people who are already professors or economists sort of at government institutions, but like have PhDs already. The publisher for the book said that they wanted to include the experiences of a trans man. The people writing the book reached out to sort of the LGBT Econ Association, and I'm the one that they found. So it was really cool. So I got to be interviewed for a book talking about my experiences like as a trans man in economics, and they said I was the youngest one that was going to be featured in the book. So I think there was something where I just, I would have never guessed this was going to be how it was going to turn out, right? I spent so long worrying, and as it turns out, it's been okay. And not only is it going to be okay, but like I think I'm going to be able to be a mentor within the field. And it was also, again, very special to be interviewed, to be part of a project, and to be acknowledged that my experience is unique, but not unique because it's impossible, just be unique because it hadn't been done before. The other thing that I'd say is that your career, especially if you're viewing it as a career, not a job, is a long game. It is way more than what grades you get in undergrad. It is way more than your first job. It is way more than your first decade working. It is can you put in, from, your 20s through your 60s, can you put in that work? And I think a lot of people really flame out very quickly because they don't find that balance between their professional life and their personal life. And they, you spend a lot of time in undergrad just spending all your time studying. And so then you arrive at your job and you spend all your time working. And that just that's not sustainable for most people. And I think of transition as a huge step towards living a balanced and sustainable lifestyle. It was only after I transitioned, actually, that I slowed down a lot, in some sense, academically. I no longer wanted to spend all of my time studying and all of my time thinking about economics because I liked hanging out with people now, because it was easier for me to socialize, because I liked myself, and so I wanted to spend more time, with myself and with other people, and less time just out of my own head, just trying to do math and do economics. And oddly enough, I think that has made me a far better economist. I treat my job now as a 9-to-5. I wake up, I go into work, I do research, I do my teaching assistant responsibilities, and I come back, and then, in this case, I made dinner and filming a YouTube video, but sometimes I'll go on dates, or sometimes I'll meet with friends, and I think that balance makes me more creative, it makes me a better researcher, and I think that it's going to make me able to stick it through, like, on the long haul, right? Because I have to write my dissertation, but then ultimately I also then have to go up for tenure, and then after tenure, it's like, who's the editor of which journal, and it just keeps on coming, and it keeps on coming. And so I think that for a lot of us, transition can actually ultimately make you a much happier and more productive, person in your career, because it allows you to have that balance. It also allows you to, again, form better and deeper connections with people. I find it way easier to collaborate with people now that I'm transitioned, because I don't know, I'm just a more fun person to be around. And that comes up professionally all the time. So I think if transition is allowing you to live authentically and allowing you to be happy, that's not just like whimsical. It's a lot deeper than that. It is hard to be a really, really successful person if you're super, super unhappy. You will at some point burn out. It is at some point going to come and hit you. And so I think that transition can ultimately help the careers of trans people, because it allows us to sort of get our mental health in order, and it allows us to get our priorities in order, and allows us to sort of view it as the long game. And so I think it's really exciting that, like, after the really hard work of trans activists for decades and decades, now that we live in a world that is not so extremely and overtly prejudicial against trans people as it was, say, 30 years ago. Not to say that there aren't lots of biases people have against trans people, not to say that it isn't hard, not to say that there won't be lots of awkward conversations, but it's a different world than it was 30 years ago. I think that we're going to see all sorts of trans people that have really exciting and really passionate careers, and that are going to be successful in all sorts of different avenues. And it's something that I'm, a group of young trans people that I'm really excited to be a part of, and that I imagine that the writer of this concern is going to be a part of too. It isn't that super cool to be a part of a group of young, ambitious trans people. Okay, so the next submission that I'm going to read is another one that came up a lot, which is looking for hope that eventually the doubts will go away, eventually that you'll know that transition was the right choice, and eventually feeling confident in yourself. So I'm going to read this whole person's specific submission, but again, these themes were reflected over and over and over again. So they write, "Hi Arthur, I know this is a hard one, but I'd like hope that I'm making the right decision to begin transitioning. For context, I'm FTM and have been wanting to transition for over 8 years. However, my biggest fear is regretting either medical transition or telling my loved ones I'm trans and then needing to tell everyone that I made a wrong decision. Despite being in therapy for years with a gender specialist, the idea of taking the first steps is frightening. I keep making excuses for not being trans enough, or I'm not trans and it's all in my head, despite knowing how silly and untrue those statements are. If you are comfortable answering, is this something you experienced? How did you know when to take specific steps? Do you have and any recommendations for getting past this and having hope/faith in myself to begin the steps I want in my transition? I think I talk about doubt on this channel so much that I'm like, oh my god, people are going to be sick and bored of it. And it's like almost, I think, one of the common themes of Arthur Rockwell is transition doubt. I struggled so much with transition doubt. I couldn't get out of my head about it. I was so unconfident in my choice to transition. It was just something I was so anxious about. It felt like the worst thing in the world to me, the idea of making that leap towards transition and then ultimately realizing it wasn't for me. I felt like I would be so embarrassed to tell people that I'd made a mistake. I felt like I would have ruined something. Like, I was such a beautiful woman, to think that I wasn't one and then go back to that, like, would just be so silly. And I had a lot of, like, negative self-talk about what it would mean to have made a mistake about a choice like this. And then these doubts would build upon themselves, right? I'm like, well, how could I possibly be doubting something as fundamental about myself as my gender? If I can't figure out my gender, how do I know anything about myself? If I can't figure it out, surely that means that I shouldn't do it. Surely that means there's something else wrong. I kept on spiraling and spiraling. You know when I finally felt really comfortable and I finally didn't have any doubts? It wasn't when I decided transition. It wasn't when I came out socially. It wasn't even after months of having people call me just Arthur and just he. It wasn't when I took my first testosterone shot. It wasn't when I took my second testosterone shot. It was months into my transition, my medical transition. It was after I'd been passing as male for, I don't know, maybe 4 months or something like this. It just started to settle in me. I started to feel comfortable in my maleness, and I started to feel like I was really living it. Like, for me, I started to pass very quickly, which is, I guess, relevant context in that. So I would say it was after, I started to pass 1 month, and then it started to be more comfortable 2 to 3 months, and then 4, 5, 6, it was like, I started to realize that I got it, like, that I was a man, and I started to realize that I was actually happy. And that thing I'd been looking for, that feeling of really being me, and of being comfortable in my body, that I was actually on that path. There was no amount of sitting and thinking that was going to get me there. That was what I realized, right? I had to actually be living it and actually be like midway through my transition to feel comfortable in the fact that I should transition. Because, I'm just that kind of person. I think about a lot of choices, right? Like, how do you know that you've made the right choice on a particular apartment, right? I'm thinking about this because I'm going to be moving apartments. And we're going to tour a bunch of apartments. And I'm going to be like, this one doesn't have in-unit laundry. This one does have in-unit laundry. How much do I need in-unit laundry? Well, you know how I'm going to know how much I need in-unit laundry? Is when I'm actually living in the apartment and it does or doesn't have it, right? You know how I'm going to know whether the lighting is good in the apartment? It's when I'm actually living in the apartment and I'm actually experiencing it. And I think there are a lot of choices in life where you can spend so much time trying to think carefully through your choice, and it's important to think carefully through your choice, of course. But some of us are, I think, wired to think very, very, very carefully through our choices, and you can spend forever on that, and you can't really actually know until you're doing it. What can I say as to hope around this? Well, I think one real big thing that I emphasize in this channel is that, no, I can't guarantee that every person who's thinking about transition is going to have the most amazing and perfect transition, is definitely transgender 1000%, and if you question it, you are. Absolutely not. What I can say is if you are thinking seriously about transition, something needs to change in your life, right? If you keep on thinking about it over and over again, and you feel uncomfortable, and you feel unsettled, something needs to change in your life. If something needs to change in your life, you need to do something. I think about the choices we make, right? And most of the time, I think we make good choices. I think the biggest thing that we as humans struggle with, especially those of us who are overthinkers like myself, is just not making a choice. And not making a choice is a choice, right? And this is actually a thing, again, that like psychologists and economists will study, but is how impactful it is. What is the default, right? We tend to stick with the default as humans. If the default were to transition, you would have already transitioned 8 years ago. The default is not to transition, and in fact, transition is deeply stigmatized. So it's a choice that we're very afraid of making. But I think that, with every choice we make in life, on average, we make good choices, right? And so I think about this, right? Like sometimes we make mistakes. But if you make choices enough, you're going to make enough correct choices that you're going to end up in a vastly different position in life than if you hadn't started making choices. And it's just you need to break yourself out of that cycle of inaction. And I think of myself like, oh my god, transition, it was part of a huge package of choices I made for myself, right? It became so much easier once I started transitioning, and once I had faith in myself as someone who has agency and who has control over his life. It became easier to start and stop relationships. I mean, I think it is not a coincidence. So I've talked a lot about how I had a very, very serious ex, a relationship that I treasured dearly, but it was not working. And it wasn't working for a long time. But it ended a couple of months into my transition. And I will say that I think it ended because of my transition, but I think in some part it's also because transition gave me the confidence to make that change. Before I transitioned, I just like wasn't making choices, and the idea of breaking up with him, like, that just felt so crazy to me. Like, I'd already told myself that I was going to spend my life with him, so how could I go back on that? I'd already envisioned myself with him. How could I come up with a new vision? That's crazy. But once I transitioned, I was like, wait, I actually can do what makes me happy, and what's making me happy is not him. So I ended that relationship. It became easier to start and end friendships. It became easier to make risks in my career. It became easier to like budget, to do financial things. Like everything about my life and about having control in my life became easier once I started to have faith in myself as someone that makes choices. And so I think taking that leap of faith is really powerful in that sense, because even if where you need to land isn't actually completing a transition, I think once you start that process of transition and taking those first steps medically, it tells yourself that you actually trust yourself, right? Because you want it. And does everything we want always work out? No, of course not. But often it does. And often enough that we should just be doing the things that we want a lot more. And so I think that it's such a powerful thing to say, hey, I have been thinking about starting testosterone for years and years and years. What if I just did it? And, when you're making a decision, ideally you should be thinking about, not just the bads, but the good side of it too, right? So it's like, what does it look like if actually that thing you've been wanting for years and years and years, you have it and it's great? And here's the thing. Transition for me is better than anything I could have possibly imagined. If you had told me back then, if you had told me that I had 30% odds of feeling how I feel right now, and the other 70% transition wasn't going to work. It was going to be a mistake. I was going to have to wind it back. I was going to have to figure out how to undo it. But 30% odds, I'm going to feel how I feel right now, I would have gone for it in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. Because it is that good. Like I'm so happy. I didn't know this like type of life could exist. The like way that I feel connected with people, and the way I feel centered in myself, and the way I feel like part of the world. I just I wake up every day, and I'm not even kidding, like I feel happy when I wake up. Like I wake up on the right side of the bed every single day. And I just could have never known it was going to be like that. And if you told me that there was even a shot at that, I would have gone for it. But I don't know, I just didn't let myself think that there was. I couldn't have conceived that it could turn out like this. And so that's the thing, I'm like, you've been thinking about this for a long time. Sure, I don't think anyone should just leap into transition, but for someone who's been thinking about it for a long time, I think there's a great shot that it will work out amazingly. I think it's certainly better than 30%, but I think that world where it works out is just like, it's something you can't even imagine. It's like, it's a whole different type of life. Yeah, and so that's the thing. How will you know that transition was the right choice? Well, you'll do it, and then you'll feel amazing, and you'll feel really happy, and that's how you'll know. And so there are a lot of people that were, sending that kind of question of just like, when will the doubts go away? I never thought the doubts were going to go away. That was one of my top worries with transition. I just never thought they would leave. But how can you doubt it if you feel amazing? Like, if you actively, in all moments, really love it. And I didn't realize that I was going to feel that good. And again, I in a mental health way struggled with the doubts. There's a lot more I could say about that, but it was a really, really, really serious problem, and I truly never believed the doubts went away. When you are living your lived experience as a trans person and loving it, the doubts will go away. And I think sometimes you just need to take that leap of faith and try it out and trust yourself that if you're doing what you want and what you want changes, then you're someone who's doing what they want, so you can do a different thing. If you're someone that doesn't do what you want because you're afraid, then you're just going to be stuck forever. And so I have a lot of faith in myself that if anything in what I wanted in my career, in my relationships, in my friendships, in my family life, in my gender, in my sexuality, if any of those things changed, I have faith that I would take the steps to get to where I need to get, because I am someone that takes action. And I think that's really powerful to embrace that. The last area for hope that I'm going to talk about is hope around people's family accepting them. So I'm going to read out again a very specific example, but there were lots of different types of concerns people had or situations that were actively going poorly. And so I'm going to talk sort of broadly about how I think about hope around family acceptance. Okay, so this person writes, I would love hope that I won't forever be the black sheep of my family. My family is outwardly very progressive and accepting, and I am so grateful for that. However, there's so much tiptoeing around my name and pronouns, and there are so many questions and statements like, quote, well, are you sure? And, quote, can I tell grandma, unquote? And, quote, you being trans doesn't make sense to me, unquote. So for this person, again, who kind of knows where their family stands, but there are lots of people who either don't know or know and aren't happy about it and sort of all over the place. For people who know where their family stands and it's not where they would like it to be, I would say that life is super, super long. So something that I've talked about with my mom recently is I've been thinking about people in my life who are, well, people who have been in my life and are no longer in my life these days. In all of these cases, it's actually not related to transition at all, but it is related to sort of there being a big disconnect with this person. Someone who I really cared about, they don't get something core about me, our lives have moved in different directions, we are just not in touch anymore. And it makes me sad because these are people that I really care about. I was talking to my mom about that, and she gave me a lot of stories as someone who is a lot older than me. Not to be insulting to my mom, but you know, who has lived a lot more years of life than me. And she was like, yeah, she's had people that have gone from her life for decades and then came back. And she told me about a specific instance around someone who she had felt had deeply betrayed her trust. And at the time, she felt she would never forgive this person. And then a couple decades passed, and she was like, you know what, I actually do forgive this person. And she went and met up with the person again, and it was really great, and the person was really apologetic, and then they were in each other's lives again. Sometimes people grow and make mistakes. People whose families don't accept them right now, or accept them but with clauses. Each day, it's like you wake up and you want that sort of relationship, you want that connection. But we have a lot of years left in our lives, and there are a lot of things that can change over that time. I think about, myself with my relationship with my parents. I don't want to dive into like too many specifics because I have a fantastic relationship with them. They're incredibly supportive, but it is not that we didn't have any problems ever. It's just that I'm not someone that wants to, again, dive into gory details about my family online. But I guess to talk about it at a high level, I was really worried because my dad is a big researcher like me. And I was worried when I came out to him that he was going to basically do exactly the research I was doing and kind of spin it back on me, right? And be like, oh, well, this study says this about testosterone and health, and this study says this about transition regret, and, really grill me on my reasons and really research it. And I was very surprised actually that he immediately was like, oh, this is your choice, this is your journey, I'm gonna let you make all those choices, I'm not gonna look into it at all. He literally told me, he was like, oh, I'm not gonna look into any of the research about anything because I know it's your choice. And I had actually put off coming out to him because I was so I literally thought, I'd actually planned about writing a whole PDF to him with all the reasons and all the citations and everything. I decided not to do that, thank God, because he did not need that at all, and I think it would have been a little offensive. But I was so convinced that was going to be a problem. It wasn't a problem. On the other hand, I think that my mom, in a very empathetic way, was worried for me. And I think, again, really, really in an admirable way, tried to keep it to herself, but was worried about the medical stuff. and was worried about, like, why did I need to be doing all this? At the time, again, we did clash over it. At the time, it really hurt me. Again, like, don't need to dive into, like, specifics because it's absolutely all resolved. And I think I did have faith at that point in my life that this would get resolved. I think the thing I would say that I think is quite applicable to this person's situation as someone, again, that is also from a progressive and accepting family, if you think about the doubts that you've had about yourself and the concerns you've had about your transition, it's kind of natural that the people that we love might have those same doubts and concerns, right? Like, I mean, again, the previous person's submission, who's obviously not the same as this person, but it's like, a lot of us spend a lot of time being deeply anxious about it and being deeply unsure, and we're living it ourselves. So of course the people around us, in trying to be empathetic, might also have doubts and concerns, but they're not us. They don't even get to see what's motivating and driving us towards it. They just see the concerns and the negative. I think about myself way back in high school when I was first becoming aware of trans people, and I sort of had learned about trans people in this, very liberal way of like, oh, well, a trans man has been a man and is always a man, and we need to redefine what a man is. And a trans woman has been a woman and is always a woman, and we need to redefine what a woman is. And I thought to myself, sure, actually that makes a lot of sense to me, cool. So why did they need to medically transition? If you're a man and have always been a man, what's the point? Can't you be a man with that kind of body? And I really remember thinking that. I was like, and I thought I was very accepting. I didn't put that upon trans people or like engage in debates online, but I really, with earnest confusion, was like, isn't the whole point that it's not about your body? Isn't the point that your mind is a man's mind and you want to engage in society as a man, so why do you need to do anything like surgically or hormonally? Like, what's the point? And then later, my intense desire to transition kicked up, and I like really knew that I needed to medically transition if I was going to do this. And I turned out a trans person. I didn't get it, right? I didn't get it until I actively was thinking that I wanted to medically transition. I did not. I mean, maybe a few years before, but there was a point in my life where I didn't understand it. And so, of course, I think people that are more distanced from it are just like, well, why are you doing that? Like, it's such a strange, right? Because it is a strange thing to be doing. Most people don't transition. It's an intense choice. It's a very specific choice. And so I think a lot of people are earnestly confused, are earnestly skeptical, and are earnestly worried. Even well-intentioned people. And I think what I would say as the point of optimism is that those people that really do care about you, I think some of them, they know they should trust you. They know they should let you live their life, your own life. And it's a failure that they're not sort of taking that step back, right? I think that my dad was so admirable in his ability to say, hey, I'm not even going to think about this. I'm not going to think about your choices. I'm going to let you make your own adult choices. And I'm going to stand back and I'm going to hope it turns out okay for you, but I'm not going to like I'm not going to be overbearing, right? A lot of people struggle with that, right? And it's not correct to struggle with that. It is not appropriate, but it is natural, I think. I think for those people, sometimes they just need to see that it worked out, right? And so they get it once they see that you're happy. They want you to be happy, but often most of us at the start of our transition are not very happy, right? We're very anxious. We hate our bodies. We aren't where we want to get. So they see this person that's unhappy and they're like, what's going on? When they see you a couple years later and it's worked out for you and you're in a good place, then again, ideally, I think a lot of those people do come around. They're like, oh, I didn't get it, but clearly, like, you're in a great relationship, you're part of a great community, you have a great job, you love yourself, cool. I don't understand why that needed to happen, but it did need to happen, clearly. And so I think often when you're in a good place, people can let go of that not understanding, and they just see the happiness, and that's all they need to see. And here's the thing, right? Like, if they see your happiness, and they don't want to celebrate that, then yeah, like, I think that's like a kind of relationship that you don't need around. And I think it's very hard when people have doubts in your choices, right? Because that's what's going on for a lot of people, right? They doubt that this is a good idea, and it sucks to be doubted. But that doesn't mean your entire life and your entire relationship always with those people is going to consist of doubt. That can be something where you can just prove them wrong, right? And I think a lot of people want to be proven wrong by you being happy. So I think that's the place of hope that I would offer for people whose families maybe might get there but aren't quite there yet, is that life is long, and when they see the end product, they might really love it for you. The thing I would say to people who haven't yet come out and are worried about it is, yeah, leave room for you to be surprised by people. Like, you really might be surprised by people. My uncle is someone who, again, I wasn't really in touch with him, not not for any particular bad reason. I just wasn't very in touch with him, and he had at times been, you know, a conservative guy, and I had no optimism that he was going to understand this, no optimism at all. And he wrote me the most beautiful email talking about how the only trans person he'd ever heard of was Caitlyn Jenner, and how this made him realize that he didn't really know me, and how he wanted to know me, and how this was such a brave thing I was doing, and it was super special. I saw him recently, and it was actually the first time I'd seen him after transition, and again, it was so sweet. It was just clear that he, like, really cared about me, and, you know, again, he lives a totally different lifestyle than me. He does, in many ways, like, live a conservative lifestyle, if that makes any sense. Like, he was talking about a lot of his friends are, like, police officers, and about drinking, about, you know, like, jobs and manual labor, just things that are, like, not my lifestyle, and I sound even dumb talking about. We have very different interests. But we share that sort of familial connection and bond, and he even did say, you know, he brought up, he was like, yeah, like, he was saying something about, he's like, I hadn't known anyone, you know, and I think he was even, like, a little shy around saying the word transgender, but he didn't know anyone before me, but then he knew me, and sometimes people will disappoint you, and sometimes people, will turn out exactly as you guessed, but that feeling of having someone that you didn't think was going to support you, that surprise is really lovely, and you want to leave people the room to surprise you like that, and the only way that you can leave people the room to surprise you like that is taking that risk on people. So I think it's worth it, right? You take that risk, sometimes it's going to work out, sometimes it won't, and sometimes it might take some time to work out. And I think we have to have, like, or it can be nice to have faith and to have patience in the people in our lives that eventually they might come around and eventually it might work out. And again, that doesn't mean that, like, you know, if someone is really a negative force in your life that you need to be interacting with them all the time. Sometimes having that faith means taking a step back from the relationship while they grow and they figure their own shit out, and then coming back towards it later. But I just think that relationships, especially with family, will evolve in all sorts of ways throughout your life. And I have really felt that I've gotten way closer with my family since I transitioned, because I think me being a happier person and being so centered in my life makes me more want to share that with my family, and they can sense that positive energy. And so I feel like a better son now that I am a son, right? And I just think that's been so lovely, and I feel so grateful again that, like, so I had 4 grandparents. 3 of them died before I transitioned. I like to think they would have really loved the man I would turn into, and it's sad to me that they didn't get to see that, but it's so beautiful and lovely that my grandfather does get to see that, and that my grandfather gets to celebrate me as his grandson. And actually he, I want to grab it, but it's gonna, like, knock over my camera. For Christmas, he baked me bread, and then he included, so there's a type of flower that's called the King Arthur flower, and so he cut out, and he's like 93, so this is pretty ambitious for him, but yeah, he cut out the logo, and then attached it onto the wrapping of the bread, because he wrapped it up in Christmas wrapping paper, the King Arthur, and I just thought that was so sweet that I decided to keep it. Yeah, and I would have never guessed that. I mean, it's not like, again, I loved my grandparents, but it's just such a different thing being trans. I would have never guessed it would turn out so well. And I think especially, just like with people limited time, I'm really happy I took that risk. And again, sometimes it doesn't work out, sometimes it does, but I think it can be very beautiful to let people surprise you like that. Okay, so this is the beginning of, I hope, a rewarding series where, I want to talk about things turning out okay. So if you have any situation in your life that you would like me to talk about, feel free to submit that in the forum, and otherwise I will see you next week with another video like this.